Hello, my name is Linville Meadows, and I'm a retired oncologist, and this is Lynn's Recovery Blog. I trained at Duke University and the University of North Carolina. Later, I served on the faculty of both institutions. I did cancer research both at the bench and in the clinic. I was honored to be designated as a clinical investigator of the National Cancer Institute. But I'm not here today to talk about the latest advances in cancer therapy, but rather about the treatment of the impaired physician, the doctor whose life is spinning wildly out of control and whose medical career is on the line. I'm talking about the old country doctor whose drinking has gotten out of hand, the young anesthesiologist dying of a fentanyl overdose locked in a bathroom stall, the burned-out ER doc who discovered that crack cocaine gave him superpowers, and the little old lady family practitioner who injected herself with Demerol every 4 hours for her arthritis, medically necessary, of course, and the orthopedic surgeon who carried vodka miniatures hidden in his socks to get him through the day. Addiction occurs among physicians at the same rate as in the general population, that is to say about 10%. Unlike the general population, however, an intensive rehabilitation program geared specifically for our profession vastly improves our chances of long-term sobriety. Over 70% of these physicians will be clean and sober and practicing medicine 5 years later. The question becomes, how is this accomplished, and can these principles be applied to anyone suffering from the disease of addiction? And who were these doctors? What did they learn? And how did it change them? We're all just bozos on this bus. As a group, we were diverse. Every specialty, every religion, every part of the country. We were frightened, for addiction had taken over our very lives. But try as we might, we couldn't quit. In rehab, we had to accept the fact that we were all the same. Our disease was very democratic that way. No longer could we drive the bus, and they wouldn't even let us navigate. Just sit in the back, they said, and try to pay attention. I don't need anyone's help. As practicing physicians, we denied our problem to everyone, including ourselves. We isolated ourselves from our friends, our family, and our colleagues. Unfortunately, we found we couldn't do it alone. All we could think about was when we were going to get high again. We were terrified that our using would be discovered. But if you'd ask us if we had a problem, we could only say, I'm fine. Of course I'm just fine. Thanks for asking. Rules were made for people who can't think for themselves. In many ways, the practice of medicine enables addiction. Black and white thinking, tunnel vision, overthinking, an ego the size of Cleveland. We were sure we knew the answer to every question, and of course we were always right. We wore the white cloak of invincibility walking up and down the hospital halls, and we carried arrogance around in our little black bags. One day at a time, the slide into full-blown addiction was slow. A drink with dinner became a dozen or more. Party favors and pain pills rightfully prescribed became the order of the day. Just as insidious was the decay of our mental function. Our get-highs were all neurotoxins, and by the time we hit detox, we all suffered from depression. We were trapped in the habits that carried us into addiction in the first place, and we held on to these old ideas with a terrible fierceness. Our little white lies became outright dishonesty. Our slipping ethics became full-blown moral bankruptcy. We thought nothing of compromising our principles when they interfered with our using. We found we could not think our way out of addiction nor into sobriety. Only prolonged and forced abstinence worked, until with time our thinking gradually returned to normal, which in most cases took 3 or 4 months, which is why 28 days is not nearly long enough. Hey, who's the doctor here? We had to accept the fact we weren't the doctor anymore. Now we were the patient. It took most of us a month just to wrap our heads around this idea. The bottle was but a symptom. Our problem wasn't just chemical dependency. Our thoughts, our reasoning, our habits, our very character had become warped. To untangle the knots of our disease required a wholesale rearrangement of who we were. Our minds, our goals, our priorities, our relationships, and more. You don't have to change much, just everything. We began the process of self-discovery, making peace with the past, removing the resentments and character defects which had hobbled us. We examined the mental patterns that led us so deeply into trouble. With much effort and a lot of help, we started dumping the old ways for the new. The principles we needed turned out to be quite spiritual in nature. Sadly, they sounded much like the words of wisdom we had learned at our mother's knee. There is a God, and it sure ain't you. We had long ago abandoned the religion of our fathers. Medicine had taken its place. She was a harsh mistress, but we loved her. She gave us respect, position, and power. Oh, and don't forget the money, the wonderful money. But as our addiction took control of our lives, we worshipped at the altar of John Barleycorn and Lady Cocaine. We surrendered our will and our lives to them and did their bidding. They had become our higher power, and they would have no other gods before them. But now they told us we had to find a higher power we could relate to, a source of strength when the terrible craving returned, for it surely would. Amazingly, for those of us who had styled ourselves as agnostics, when we reached out, we found something. Prayer became a part of our world, and much to our great intellectual surprise, it actually worked for us. I'm not the thoughts in my head. We discovered we could control our thinking. We were no longer at the mercy of our resentments or our emotions. We learned how to shed negativity in all of its forms. We learned that we could decide which thoughts we wanted to keep and which thoughts we could reject. This new thinking encouraged us to try new patterns of behavior. We gave up self-seeking and began to care for our fellow man. We learned the dangers of our ego and self-will when they were given free rein. The idea that we were the most important person in the world had to go. The altruism that brought us to medicine in the first place, and which had died so gloriously in the days of our using, was rekindled. My job, my wonderful job. No longer was our medical career our number one priority. My new priorities were my higher power, my recovery from addiction, and my family, in that order. And I'm glad to say that helping others was now back on the list. When we listened to our deepest inner self, all manner of virtues came tumbling out, honesty chief among them. We liked the way it made us feel. As Thomas Jefferson said, honesty is the first page in the book of wisdom. We ceased fighting anything and everything. Overcoming our addiction changed us. Life was good and getting better every day. We were at peace with ourselves, our world, and with life itself. But like any other chronic disease, daily treatment was required. Constant vigilance of our thinking was necessary if we were to maintain our sobriety and our newfound serenity. These principles of the treatment of addiction to drugs and alcohol are not new, but they've been applied here with an enlightened intensity. So yes, they can be used on anyone who is ready to change. I know a lot about addiction because I've been there, personally. Wine and cocaine were my drugs of choice. I can't remember the day I crossed over the line and into addiction, but certainly my life was unmanageable. Either I was getting wasted or I was waiting to get wasted. Everything I had worked for my whole life was going down the drain. Sometimes I wanted passionately to quit, and sometimes I just didn't care. I had reached a point where it was either quit or die. Fortunately, at that point, my nurses intervened on me, and I was sent to detox and then to rehab. I was so sick they kept me in rehab for over 7 months. My sobriety date is May the 7th, 1997. My years in sobriety have been the best of my life. Broken relationships have been restored. I have my self-respect back. Perhaps most importantly, I have faith that life is good. I've learned that life is actually easy, and if it seems otherwise, maybe I'm doing it wrong. Thanks for letting me share. This is Len's Recovery Blog.